I didn't realize you were so well versed in Utah culture.
I mean, my people there wouldn't be Utah if it wasn't for my people. Who do you think brought Brigham Young out? He sat in the back of the wagon freaking sick.
Who are your people? Just for clarity, who are your people here?
They were the angels of death. We wouldn't have the West.
All right, Mark. Thanks for joining us and welcome everyone to the IO podcast. So Mark grew up in Idaho. We're going to talk about that a little bit. He went to Southern Utah University, which he calls the MIT of Southern Utah. Played some football there and then broke into tech after that, leading the revenue orgs at a bunch of really successful companies, Parametric, Opsware with Ben Horowitz and Mark Andreessen. If you've read Hard Thing About Hard Things, Mark's one of the main characters there and actually how I got to know him a little bit too. He then joined Andreessen Horowitz where he built out the market development team, which added billions in pipeline to the Andreessen Horowitz portfolio companies. We're going to talk about that. And then after Andreessen has spent his time as the COO of SignalFx, Skydio, now is investing and advising startups. And stoked to have you here today, Mark. Thanks for joining.
Happy to be here.
So real quick story. It'll just take 20 seconds or so. I'm sitting up in Boise, Idaho, Mark. I'm reading Hard Things About Hard Things. And I read this story about this sales leader from Southern Utah. And it's telling the story about a speech that you gave. I'm going to have you tell the story if you're open to it. And Ben Horowitz is saying how he almost couldn't hire you because people were telling him, you cannot hire Mark Cranney. And I read this story. I burst out in laughter in my family room in Boise. I put my book down and I say to my wife, Laura, I got to meet this guy, Mark. I pick up my laptop and I send you, I don't know if you remember this, Mark, but I send you a cold LinkedIn message, something like, hey, thanks for setting the bar so high for a Southern Utah University grad in tech. Send. It wasn't a great cold message, it was fine. You replied in about 2 minutes, go T-Birds. And you should have seen how stoked I was. Laura still remembers the day that Mark Cranney replied to my message. And the long story short is I finally convinced you to let me intern at the Bay Area. You made fun of me for going to get an MBA, and you changed the course of my career. So thanks for doing that. But Mark, you got to tell the story from the book. Do you mind talking about why Ben Horowitz was like being advised not to hire you?
Well, that was it. Probably the takeaway from that is reference checks. I provided them a very long list of references, and to his credit and a few of the other execs, they went through the whole list. I mean, probably dozens. One of the VPs on E-staff, who I didn't even interview with because she knows who she is, was out on maternity. Her husband was buddies with an ex-PTC guy, or maybe he was still there, I don't remember. And he was a trainer at PTC. And I used to, when I was in the field as a second line manager, I'd go back and, guest instructing type stuff. And he was a trainer, but, a lot of the trainers weren't exactly not good enough to hang on to the leadership jobs, but not bad enough to get rid of. So they'd put them into training.
Okay.
And I might have been a little rough on one of his classes.
Yeah, tell us about that class, though. You got to say the line and everything, Mark.
I don't remember. I think it's probably blown a little out of proportion. I said, look, I don't care how well trained you are. If you don't hit your number, you're going to probably get a bullet. So, so it's not just about training is the takeaway. It's about production.
Yeah. I actually think there's a super interesting takeaway there because in the good times, we tend to get very theoretical and we kind of forget the rubber meets the road at a certain point, and that's actually the only thing that matters. I'm curious if you would agree with that, Mark. Do you think that we can tend to get a little caught up in the philosophy of it all and forget that at the end of the day, this is about hitting a number and kind of doing whatever it takes to get there?
Well, look, first of all, no one is a bigger advocate of training and enablement than me. And if anybody's been through one of my boot camps, and there's a reason we call it a boot camp, it's you would know that the granularity and getting people from unconscious incompetence to conscious incompetence to conscious competence and eventually unconscious competence is huge, right? And the quicker you do that in a new hire situation, the quicker you're going to have productivity. So in everywhere I've been, it's like very quickly, at least once a quarter, if you're scaling up, when you get bigger, you might have these once a month, but a new hire training class and everybody's got to go through it is huge. But I think the point I was making was, there's plenty of meat squad All-Americans, right? So if anybody's played any ball, you're on the scout team and, you do great in practice, but it's all about what happens in game time, right? And everything you're doing outside of game time is preparing for, whether it's sports, whether it's any profession, whether it's getting ready to make a sales call. If you've got 8 hours to chop down a tree, how are you going to use that 8 hours? Are you going to go sharpen the saw for 7 and efficiently cut that down when it's game time? Or are you going to just sit there and hack at it for 8 hours? So when I'm looking at, hiring or partnering with someone, I want to know their kind of whole background and kind of what makes them tick and what's their golden spur. And a lot of that probably comes from the earlier years.
So what are you trying to pick out specifically, Mark? Because you said they're pretty formed by the time you're teenagers, and certainly by the time you're interviewing them. So when you go to dive into what makes them tick, what are you looking for, and what are you looking to avoid?
Well, so I mean, a lot of it depends on the role, right? So if we're talking about a seller, an AE, I'm looking for success themes and then proof points and progression, right? And I'm also, the success themes are things like, are they, intellectual horsepower is one, obviously. Doesn't have to be the 3.99 or 4.0, but and fine, the B student's fine, but what else did they do? Courage is super important, particularly on the selling side. How did they get that courage? What kind of courage is it? What is the the EQ on top of the IQ? Focus and discipline. How did they get focus and discipline? Right. I'm also looking for, do they have a little bit of woo, like personality? How they carry themselves. Are they going to get attention? What can they put themselves in somebody else's shoes? Do they listen? Can they take instruction? Do they work as a team, or are they more individual contributor? You can figure a lot of this stuff out, and there's nothing wrong with, I've noticed a big difference between like a individual sport athlete and a team sport athlete. Not saying one's better than the other, but there's a different management that happens there as well. And some of that might be, how they grew up, how they were coached, and or on the academic side, who their, mentors were. What was the family upbringing like? What birth order were you? That explains a lot of things too. Is it a big family and you're the youngest? Are you in the middle? Are you an older? Were you one of the older child? Who are you competing with? Competing with your parents? You're competing with your kids or your siblings?
Mark, do you want to find oldest children? Is that what you're looking for there? What's a good answer there?
There isn't a good answer. There's probably an understanding that happens.
Yeah.
The younger child is probably competing with the older siblings for attention versus the older ones probably competing for the attention of their parents with other people. It might be the uncles, right?
Yeah.
In my case, right? So
you mentioned courage is a big deal too. Oh, go ahead.
If you're going to go jump into a team or get somebody on your team, you want to kind of understand what their motivations are and how you're going to interact with them going forward. So
You mentioned courage is a big deal, especially if you're hiring for like an AE or sales role. How do you find out if someone's courageous? What kind of questions are you asking for that?
Well, and it's not necessarily, courage is probably, uh, you can ask kind of crazy question. What's the most courageous thing you've ever done?
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever had a near death experience? Things, things of that nature, right? What have you ever had to overcome? Big trauma.
Yep.
Tell me about it.
So you mentioned
So,
sports. You end up going to Southern Utah University on a football scholarship, right?
uh, actually, I went on an academic. I was hell bent on playing quarterback. I was, buck 65 and 5'10". Went to Southern Utah because I thought I could play quarterback. It lasted a whopping week. So I broke my hand the first. I broke my throwing hand the first week and ended up playing DB anyway. So
Gotcha. All right, so you're in Cedar City, Utah. For those who aren't familiar, this tiny town, Southern Utah, very small school, small program. How do you break into tech coming out of a small program like that, being an Idaho farm boy? Like, what's your journey into tech like? How'd you do
well,
that?
I went to after school. I went to I pivot. There's forks in the road. There's decisions you make. Like one's I went to a small no name school. Well, I went there for my own reasons, and you're 18 years old, and I wanted to play quarterback. I wasn't thinking about the name of the school. I ended up graduating business degree. Had a family, needed to make money. The reason I got into sales was it was something. I said, where can I go compete day to day, have control of my own destiny, kind of like owning your own business. I knew I wasn't going to farm. I knew that very early. One place I could go, and I ended up just going to the biggest city that was the closest. I got in my four-wheel drive and drove to LA and interviewed for 2 weeks and had multiple offers in the office equipment industry. So I went from there to medical devices and equipment. And then in 98, I crossed over from a medical device startup to where I was a VP of sales and marketing to PTC. Was up in Seattle. I was looking around, Microsoft, this whole internet thing, some guy named Mark Andreessen, and the web thing was going on. And they were hiring, their profile was to hire, said, look, we don't care about the tech. We want extremely trained, competent sales and leadership and management training. We'll teach the tech. I progressed at PTC to run in the Americas and got a call early 2000s from a recruiter. And I'd avoided the Valley for a long time. I was back in Boston. I'd moved back to Boston.
So, Mark, when we were thinking about this convo, and I thought about my time interning under you at Andreessen, what seems to stand out with you and your background is kind of what Ben Horowitz said in that book is, if I remember right, you showed up with a literal playbook, an actual really thick document of like, here's all my references, here's how I'd run training, here's how I'd manage folks. We'd love to spend 10 or 15 minutes kind of better understanding that playbook if you're open to that. And so a bunch of founders will be listening to this and they're going to be wondering how they can hire their own Mark Cranney as a head of sales. Like, what should they be looking for as they hire a head of sales? What are the things that they need to make sure happen?
Well, one of the biggest mistakes I think, particularly product-centric first-time founders make is they go for the bigger company and the bigger company name. The easiest way to, I think, figure out how to hire these type of executives is to determine, are they somebody that's run in somebody else's playbook, or are they somebody that's put it together,
Mm-hmm.
right, and deployed it? And do they have the granularity to do that, or are they just a better later stage person that's fine at operating something that's already scaled up? There's nothing wrong with those type of cats, but if they don't have the desire to learn and innovate and drive that granularity of the process and customize that playbook to the company that they're joining, that can be a big disappointment, right? Oh, well, I'll hire an enablement person. it almost never works. Or I'm the big picture guy or gal, right? That type of stuff never works. I want to run the spreadsheets. You know, there's people that can put it together, and there's people that can run in it. Easiest way to kind of delineate that,
So this is
right?
actually something that I think about a lot, because when I hear the term playbook, I think, oh, you imagine that there's some exactly repeatable thing that I had at this company and I'm just going to do the same thing over here. And I think that's totally wrong, because every situation is unique and has these different variables. So what I just heard you say, Mark, is if you were the person who developed the playbook at your last company, you're going to be able to tweak it and make it successful in a new environment. And if need be, redo the whole damn thing. But if you just ran somebody else's playbook, you're just going to try and shove that square peg into a round hole. It's not going to work. Because I would agree with that. Is that what you were saying, Mark?
Yeah, I mean, think about it. You go hire a big company exec, and they've been operating in somebody else's playbook because they didn't put it together. All of a sudden, you come in and try to retrofit that. An easy example is, look, is this a PLG bottoms up, or is this a top down, or do I need to put all 3 or 4 layers in? Enterprise, major accounts, commercial in the middle, SNMB, right? A lot of it's so much of it depends on the company, their maturity, the product, their customers, the domain knowledge inside the customer base, what verticals, how to stair step that function. Where am I going to go first?
Mm-hmm.
Am I going to enter in on the side, or can I go top down? What the competition is, who the incumbents are. There's a lot of things to figure out, right? The stage of the company is a huge, if somebody hasn't done those stages or been a student of the game, I mean, they're probably a schmo, not a pro, right?
Yep.
So are they a student of the game? Are they a student of the business? And what do they bring to the table? Do they have particularly on the leadership side, do they have a following?
Yep.
Right. So
Absolutely.
or did they inherit? Easy question. All right. Well, I ran 100 people for a year or 18 months at XYZ big company. It had a huge number, but that number, you have a huge base, and how many of those people did you hire? How many would follow you? Let's pick up what are the references? Would you follow this person to the next deal?
What you're trying to figure out is, what did you actually build? Like, where are your fingerprints? Who did you hire? What were the things that you had to figure out for yourself versus, it was just scaling what somebody else had already done? Because I think that's a skill set that is pretty common in revenue orgs in tech these days. Is like, hey, we all know how to go out and kind of like add bodies to it, scale the comp plan, but to figure out everything from the ground up, like, what's your mix? What percent inbound? What percent outbound? What's your SDR to AE ratio? Like, the people who actually figure that stuff out and then bring in scalers, it's a totally different skill set altogether.
Well, the other piece you really want to look for is maturity as well. And look, the founder, particularly product-centric technical founder, and that's kind of where, particularly with Ben, and subsequently after, and even at my time at Andreessen Horowitz, was that exec, or these go-to-market execs, or any exec for that matter, is what's the complement, and are we ready to do whatever is in this playbook, right? Yeah. And having the maturity to say, well, look, I mean, I remember being at Opsware just a few weeks, and I'm saying, look, we got, your product's a complete disaster. It's a mess. And you're talking about all these goofy terms that no one talks to a customer about. Like they had features and functions and architecture named after rappers and stuff, right? Well, you got to go to explain what Purple Rain is, because I don't know what the hell Purple Rain is. I mean, literally spending I'll give you another example at SignalFx. The first 90 days, we had almost a daily standing meeting on architecture and building out the POV, or the point of view, the pitch deck, and building out and layering how we're going to take a customer across that journey into our differentiation versus incumbents versus our startup type competitors. 90 days with the founders, the VP of Eng, the CTO, the technical founder. It said, let's get on the whiteboard and then transfer this thing into a pitch deck and a progression. How do we layer this bite-sized chunks of this content across the stage gate sales process, put Medic over the top for opportunity management, and be able to take someone down this journey? And you're never done. You're never done with it. You're always going to be iterating. And how do you do it now versus, understanding where the product was, where it is, and where it's going? The roadmap is super important, because you can get customers, particularly in the startup world, you can get customers to go with you on that journey if you can articulate where I'm at, where I've been, where I'm at, and where I'm going to go, and get them to buy in with, okay, I get it. I get it. This is why it's different. The whole thing about a startup, the startup is you're doing something different that a customer doesn't necessarily know. The value of a go-to-market organization is to help a customer determine what their buying criteria is.
Well,
right? It's not about communicating value. It's about creating value.
Yeah. And Mark, you just hit something that really, really tugs at my heartstrings, because, a lot of people think like Medic is their sales process, is their methodology.
That drives me nuts.
I know.
Drives me completely nuts. Our sales process is Medic. It's not a sales process. Yeah. It's an opportunity qualification process.
What you were talking about, the work you did on the whiteboard.
Look, somebody tells me that, it's like, boom, eject button, out.
You're not wrong.
What you're saying, something, Sterling, it's the work on the whiteboard is actually the sales process, is what you're saying?
Well, and what Mark's saying is, that those first 90 days, and who's in the room. You got the CTO, you got the product visionary and the founders, and you're mapping out this journey, and you're saying, how do we differentiate at crucial junctures, and how do we actually take this to market? I think it's a little bit of a lost art. I think we just kind of jump in. We all got hooked on. Yeah, go ahead, Mark.
I'm not sure it's a found art.
I think you're probably right.
Look, don't forget. I mean, it's the marketer, it's the customer success, the pro serve person. It's getting everybody on the same sheet of music. One little trick I've used for a few decades, particularly in this process, is, and back to the sales training piece and enablement, is taking that. The first thing I want to do, and the stake in the ground is, all right, in a month, 2 months, probably is typically a 90-day process. I'm going to have my first boot camp. Guess who's going? It's not just for the sellers. Everybody's going. Everybody's going to boot camp. Guess who's delivering it? The whole e-staff. Okay. Guess how we're going to deliver it. We're not going to sit in there and PowerPoint it and here's how you do it, and everybody sits around and break everybody up into teams. I got sellers, I have SEs, I have product marketers, product managers, I have the execs, founders, technical, other founders, even the CFO. We're playing customer. Back to Tyler, Mr. Cornell MBA from Southern Utah, right? We're going to actually treat it like we're going to have 2 or 3 case studies from hopefully customers we've done or people we're in process with if it's super early stage. And we're going to go through all the stages and gates of the sales process, all the content, about 50% product content, 50% process. And every time we go through, okay, here's the POV, here's the pitch, here's how we do it, here's how we tell the story, here's the deliverables, here's a list of discovery questions, here's a list of criteria, and starting with the competitive depositioning, we're going to stop. We're going to make them go through a discovery process. Day one, at the end of the day. The next morning, we're going to make them pitch. So we're actually treating this like a case study in these teams, and we can make it competitive. By the end of the week, we go through the entire sales process in a case study with teams. Everybody's competing. They have to present in front of their peers like 4 or 5 times across the 4.5-day boot camp. And the reason to call it boot camp is it's, you might not make it. You might be ringing the bell, right? What that gives you is you're going to get to conscious competence very quickly. You're going to have you as a new hire are going to be forced to work with the deliverables, to perform in front of peers. We're not going to wake up 6, 9, 12 months later and figure out that, A, we haven't done our job at training and enabling you, and B, you haven't done your job preparing. There's going to be no excuses by Friday. No excuses. So your productivity ramp dramatically collapses. The second piece is it's a forcing function for the whole organization to understand what our gaps are. What's the gaps in our strategy? What's the gaps in our content? What's the gaps? Maybe our roadmap's off. Maybe we got to get better at this. What's our gap in our tooling, right? What's our gap in our RevOps piece? What's our gap in our pricing and packaging and quoting and things in that? What do we need to do from a system standpoint across the org? And then at least once a quarter, I'm turning that versus once a year to go do the SKO, right? Where once a year, the marketer's going to redo the pitch deck. You can't do that in a startup high growth situation. You just can't.
Yeah.
You will get annihilated. Burnt toast, kind of like when Tyler was playing, try to pitch maybe, in his youth.
So Mark,
you look, I think it was first base. Is that right?
Were you going to say I look like a first baseman, Mark? You are not wrong.
You look like a first baseman. Yes.
So Mark, this is like gospel, and this is stuff that everybody should be doing that almost nobody does. But here's a question for you. I always felt super lucky running revenue at Divvy because Tyler was a very sales-minded product leader, and so a lot of this stuff he was just as gung-ho about it as I was. But this sort of process that you just outlined, where you've got your technical leaders, you've got your E-team, how did you bring them along? Because I think there's a lot of people who'd be fairly resistant to it.
Well, look, this is a culture issue too, right? So, you're charging up the hill. If you get up to the top of the hill and there's a bunch of them at the bottom still, then, you just leave them or you run back down and shoot them. I mean, usually you just leave them. So I don't know. You either get with the program or go find another program.
Yeah.
So.
But what if it's your counterpart, Mark? It's the CTO. He or she's on the E team with you. You can't go shoot the CTO when you're the VP of sales or the CRO. So how do you bring your peers along?
Well, Mark just disagreed with you there.
Well, I mean, hopefully you have a little bit of sales skill.
Yeah, you'd hope.
You can persuade them.
Yeah.
But, right? So ideally.
All right. So you brought up
you got to get people to buy into the program, right? And look, you look at any organization or company, look, Bill Belichick doesn't, he goes out or any coach, you go out and you play a season with that team. You're always trying to get better during that season, but you look left and you look right a year or two down the line, there's going to be different team members.
Yeah.
Right. It's all about getting better. And it's not about you or me. It's about the mission, right? Here's the mission. So you've got to evangelize and say, look, this is why we're doing this. They'll see it. Again, probably the easiest way and the most effective way to reduce this cycle time is what I just described. Everybody is part of putting this boot camp together. Their new hires are going through it. Right. So we also would do a second week. So all sales engineers and or product managers or marketers, technical product managers or marketers should go through this as well. The sales piece. How do you interact with each other from R&D all the way to product engineering, product management, to product marketing, to marketing, demand gen, all the content, downstream to the SEs and the sellers, everybody's management. You think about, we'd always do at least another week of a deep dive for the SEs. I want my SEs to be, on par with a technical product manager and or technical product marketer, right? I want to be able to move them, particularly if I'm hiring somebody. A lot of my best technical product marketers or even managers have come up through the SE path, right? And everybody can get, singing from the same sheet of music, using the same playbook, because it's all about moving the process along with the customer and their buying journey. And the more efficient we get, where everybody's showing up at the right time in the right place to move the chains or to move that process along, that's where you get efficiency, right?
Yep.
And I think that's in anything. Bill Belichick is, there, or any coach that you might like. I hate the Patriots, but I love Bell. He's those old school type coaches are you can learn a lot from them, and they're always adjusting.
Mark, you brought up culture and that it's a culture issue at some point. What's the culture of a Mark Cranney led sales org, and how did you instill it?
Well, look, it's granular process. It's about terrorizing incumbents. It's about winning. That's the only thing that matters is winning and win rates, and everything you've put together from a process and a people and a tech standpoint to make it repeatable and to scale it and to get everybody singing from the same sheet of music. So if somebody's not pulling their weight, because enterprise selling is a team sport, it's definitely not an individual sport. I think there's this fallacy or this mindset that it's about an individual contributor. The best ICs are the ones that run their business like leaders and can know when to get the right resource and or use the right deliverable at the right time to move the ball. And they're very good at spending their time in the right place. And then the inspection, inspecting what you expect. And look, medics, that's probably the biggest advantage of deploying medic on top of a world-class sales process is the inspection piece, right? It's a quick and dirty way of understanding where I'm at, determining what the next steps should be, and qualifying what to do next, right?
You've used that phrase twice now, Mark, to inspect what you expect. Teach us about that. I mean, I could probably guess what you mean, but what's the framework? What's your learning there?
They didn't cover that in the MBA class at Cornell, Mark.
Yeah.
Yeah, I told you waste 2 years with that thing. But.
In fact, what you told me was, why would you go pay $90,000 a year for a wasted degree when I could get you a better network in 20 minutes in Silicon Valley? That's what you told me.
By the way, Mark was right, 100%.
He was right. Yeah, he was right.
Yeah, look, I'm sure it looks good on your wall. I'm surprised it's not behind you right now.
Oh, that's great.
I would have loved it to be able to hang out for 2 years and, at Cornell. That would have been fun.
Mark, I spent one of those 2 years trying to convince you to hire me, so it worked out. It worked out okay, right? It worked out.
All right.
Hey, so we're coming up on some time here. Sterling, are there any other playbook questions? We got to make sure we pull out a Mark before we wrap up in a minute.
So I think Mark crushed it. I am curious. You've invested in, advised, worked at a bunch of these companies. What's the most common thing that people just get wrong? Like that is broken in their thinking?
Oh, that's a tough question. There is a long list.
Let's hear the top few.
When you say people, What people? Founders.
Let's talk
founders,
leadership.
Sellers.
Let's talk specifically about like founder leadership team.
Mm-hmm. Probably the biggest one is, and I dealt with this. I still have to deal with it a little bit, but at Andreessen Horowitz is like, teach me how to, they a lot of the learnings on the tech side, they think they can apply the same methodology. I can read a book, teach me how to sell on a one-on-one for a half hour, that type of stuff. It's like there's tech founders, but there's also like organizational founders, right? So that's kind of, and the knowledge that I think Ben actually had mentioned this in one of his podcasts or something. Look, from a founder standpoint, I need to go buy domain and institutional knowledge. That could be customer, with a sales leader or a CMO or a customer success person. Go hire what you don't have. Don't try to figure it out all yourself. A lot of, but the only way of doing that is from a technical founder standpoint, is you've got to educate yourself. You've got to do some of this stuff yourself. You got to get out in the field and get run over a few times before you're going to become consciously incompetent, right?
Yep.
There's a lot of people, I think they're just unconsciously incompetent. They don't know what they don't know. They haven't spent, I've made thousands and thousands of sales calls across the world with thousands of companies. Been in a lot of situations. A lot of situations, it's not about what they said verbally, the customer, the seller. It's about, reading tea leaves. It's about running a process. It's about not cutting corners. I think founders cut corners, sellers, sales managers, marketers, everybody wants a shortcut. There are no shortcuts. What happens if you take a shortcut? You guys are up in Utah, I assume,
yep.
Right? It's a little easier in Utah because it's not, it's just Utah. It's mostly desert. But if you go up in Idaho where they actually have forests and trees and water, if you go out and take a shortcut in certain areas, at least where I grew up, you might end up being bear shit, right? That's what happens a lot, I think, in company building, is people take shortcuts and they end up getting wiped out.
What's an example of a shortcut that founders try and take? What's a good example of that?
Well, one is, look, I'm going to hire, we're a bottoms up company, and I know that we are going to need a higher end VP of sales, but I want to start with an inside person, and then I can probably get a year or two out of them, and then I'll top them, right? It's probably better to over provision. A good example is if I, like take Okta, for example. Adam Aarons at Okta, was one of the first companies I worked with in Andreessen Horowitz before I even joined there. Is they had this kind of strategy of doing it the way, this goes back to the Playbook thing. Both the founders had come out of Salesforce, and Benioff built that company bottoms up, and it was an inside Salesforce, and then they layered things up. What was apparent to me very quickly was the value proposition for cloud identity management, at least at that time, was at the bigger companies versus the smaller ones, that was going to be sticky, and the bigger dollars were going to be there. Don't just hire an inside person, hire somebody that can build the outside direct sales force, and they can backfill and run the inside sales force as well, right? Don't under provision, over provision, because you want to skate to where the puck's going to be, not to where the puck is or was.
Yeah.
Right. So that's an example.
Cool.
But
I realize, Mark, I cut you off on the inspect what you expect thing. Can you teach us about that in 30 seconds? I want to hear it.
I don't think you did. Look, Medic is an inspection tool. It's a forecast inspection, a deal inspection tool. Do you have metrics? Have you talk, where are we at with the economic buyer? Do you understand the decision process? Do you understand and can you impact the decision criteria, right? Have you identified pain? Do you have a champion, right? A lot of people use MedPick. Do you know the paper process, right?
Got it.
So do you know the difference between a coach and a champion or a supporter, right? People screw that up all the time. Right. I can't tell you how many sales calls I've gone in. Oh, I'm going to introduce you to the champion, and walked out and said, "That's not your champion. That's your enemy. That's just somebody that's staying close to you to bury you." So,
Mark, one thing that's like it just kind of resonated throughout the whole conversation, I think in revenue leadership, especially during kind of the zero interest rate phenomenon era, there became a philosophy about like, I'm just going to love my reps and my managers. I'm just going to love them so much that they're going to perform really well. I'm going to love them to their number. And when peacetime. Those guys aren't going to make it, are they? Bear shit.
That was peacetime. Well, I mean, look around. Yeah. It's wartime now.
And I want to call out for everybody that this operating at the lowest level of detail and establishing these processes and doing that hard work up front is what makes you durable and gives you staying power, right? If you confuse like culture and process and all of these things and you get them mixed up and you just think, well, I'm just going to like encourage and love people to hitting their number, it doesn't work when it gets really hard. It crumbles.
Yeah, it's look, and not, that's a culture question too, right? Not everybody wants to sign up to go, join or, play for Bill Belichick, right?
Yeah.
They don't want that kind of pain. So again, that gets back, and it's incumbent upon the hiring authorities as well as an applicant to decide, is this a right fit for me? Do I like that type of culture? Do I like that, these people want to be, they want an 80, 90% win rate, right? Or if you don't, you need to self-select in or out if you don't like that. If you want that peacetime culture, there's plenty of big companies where you can do your, work-life balance and all that good stuff and have it.
Yeah.
Right. If you want to go to war and have fun, disrupting a space, terrorizing and bigger company incumbents and carving something out that's special, and then you're going to pay that price, but you've got to figure that out. It's not just about the hiring authority either. It's about the applicant too. You got to want to be in that granular. I'm going to get better 1%, 2% every day, right? I want to be around people that think that way, that operate that way. That's up to you, right? If you don't want to self-select out if you don't like it.
That mutual opt-in's a big deal. I screwed this up so many times when I was learning because I just thought, hey, if you're smart and capable and talented, like I want you, right? I didn't realize that it had to be mutual. And so the phrase that I started using later on in the journey was, we're the Navy SEALs. And so if you're looking for the Coast Guard, like this isn't for you and you're not for me, right? And that's perfectly okay. It's actually, there's no right or wrong answers. Like you said, there's plenty of companies out there if you're looking for a Coast Guard gig. But like we're trying to be Navy SEALs.
And easy on the Coast Guard. One of the PTC guys I worked for, Johnny Hanlon at PTC, was a
Coast Guard guy.
He might have been Maritime Marines or something, but he might not have been good enough to get in the Coast Guard early on.
Mark, we have a couple questions.
Easy on the Coast Guard. I understand your analogy.
You got it. I'll polish it up.
I didn't know you were so easily offended there, Mark. We'll tone it down a little bit.
Killers. You're probably not a killer if you're in the Coast Guard. You're a saver.
That's right.
All right, couple questions we asked just to wrap it up, kind of rapid fire. Mark, you're obviously a pretty experienced operator, but who's the operator or leader that you admire the most?
Look, there's a lot of great operators. So you're probably going to ask me investors, and there's a long list of them. So,
I am going to ask you that one. What about an investor you admire, if you admire any of them?
Of course, it's you two.
Yeah,
You know,
exactly.
Up and coming gentlemen, entering your investing career. So
Nailed it. All right, Mark, this was great, man. Sorry for the early hiccups, but great conversation. We loved it. We'll send you a recap after.
Edit out all this swearing probably because you guys are in Utah Valley.
Bear
probably,
shit
right?
stays exactly where it is.
We wanted a bunch more swearing. I didn't want the PG version of Mark, but we got it.
Well, I'm trying to be cognizant of the,
Demo.
You guys still got to go, serving the bishopric this weekend.
All right, Elder Cranney. Take care.
See ya.
See ya.
How did the convo go versus what you were expecting? Called you a first baseman, which I don't know what that means.
A little
but-
beefy is what
little
he's saying.
beefy. Okay, that's nice. So I and I don't know, maybe drinking the tea a little bit as someone who spent most of their time in revenue, but that was incredibly valuable to anybody who wants to understand how to actually tactically set up a go-to-market motion. That was amazing.
Yeah, Mark did a good job of actually getting into the weeds on his playbook, I think, in a way that other guests haven't yet. And the other observation I had is how similar a lot of the stuff he says is to what you say. Like, I've been around Sterling enough that I know he just eats, breathes, drinks this GTM stuff. And I knew you'd like Mark, and you guys are singing from the same hymn book, to use his word.
It was honestly funny because a lot of the stuff he's saying, I'm like, I haven't heard
Other
much
people.
of this.
Shibboleth.
Yes. He was spewing shibboleth like the whole time. But
You better tell people what shibboleth is.
shibboleth is a term from the Old Testament. They actually used it to tell, like, if you were the enemy. If you mispronounced shibboleth, they knew you were an imposter. And funny enough, he said when people call medic a sales process, he knows they're not for real. Right? Like, and he had a couple of really good insights there. One thing that was funny to me is we tried to dig into, like, hey, how do you get a product leader, an engineering leader to participate in this boot camp? Because I think there'd be a fair amount of resistance to that at a lot of companies.
Yeah. What do you think of his answer? I mean, to me, it was pretty simple. It's like, well, A, you've got to persuade them, and B, this isn't a revenue boot camp.
Yes.
It's a company boot camp.
That's right.
So reframe the whole thing.
That's right. And the amount of times he said something to the tune of, like, alignment or sing from the same sheet of music, and you have to create that culture from the very top down.
100%.
It's actually one thing I felt like you always did a very good job of as a product leader, is making sure that you're standing shoulder to shoulder with the frontline sales teams, the frontline support teams. But it's an easy thing to not do unless you're very intentional about it.
Yeah, I agree. So we talk themes. One of the themes was, like, this go-to-market thing is not a revenue thing. It's the whole company, and it's his job to get the whole founding team bought into his playbook, essentially, his boot camp. And that's, I think, a key theme that shined through. You agree?
100%. The other thing that stuck out for me is his sort of moving from unconscious incompetence all the way to conscious competence. And it's amazing because you have to know pretty much at any given time and on any given topic, where are you on that scale? Because otherwise it's impossible to make progress. You also have to know where people on your team are on that scale and on that path of progression. Otherwise, you can't really help them that much either.
Which is why he's so big on training, by the way, because he sees training as the only way to move along that spectrum to conscious competence.
And then he's trying to cram all of that training and enablement into the shortest amount of time possible.
Correct.
He's not like a, hey, we throw you in there and you learn on the job kind of thing.
Yep.
He's like, it is my job to get you prepared to go to war.
Sharpen the axe.
Yep. And then it's your job to be successful once you're there.
Exactly.
And Yeah, go ahead.
That was another theme. Sorry, finish your thought.
No, go ahead.
Third one that you called out was, and this is another shibboleth that you always say, is operating at the lowest level of detail. It is clear that Cranney did that. And he's not this figurehead leader. And I don't think CROs and let alone other executives can really be figurehead leaders, especially at the startup stage.
Tyler, I got the advice from board members, from investors, from mentors all the time that I was too granular, right? I was in it too much. And I have just come to believe that is absolute peacetime crap. And if you don't understand your business at that lowest level of detail and understand what the actual drivers are and which levers you actually can pull, you're just living on borrowed time. And I think talking to Mark sort of strengthened my conviction there.
Yep, I agree. All right, what else? What other themes? I mean,
another theme is very clearly like the hiring bar and the hiring practice and his sort of mutual opt-in. You have to know who you are and accurately advertise
who you are
yep. to attract the right people, and then you have to verify that they are in fact those people. But it's a mutual thing.
Yep, 100%. The one regret I have is we didn't spend a bunch of time talking about the team and the process he built at Andreessen Horowitz, which completely changed venture capital. And the 20-second version is he called it the market development team, but it essentially was outsourced or sales assistant for the portfolio companies, where they would help fill your pipeline and help train you how to be an elite sales org as a part of the investment that Andreessen Horowitz made into your company. He ran that org. And, he'd go to these founders like Okta and he'd say, Todd, who do you want to sell to? Who's in your pipeline? And Todd would say Walmart and Sears and Amazon. And he'd say, great, I'll have the CIOs in Andreessen's office next Wednesday. Can you fly down? And we're going to have you pitch them, and we're going to help you, add them to your pipeline. And so this guy has added more pipeline to more software companies probably than anyone who has ever existed, which is pretty cool.
And on the investor side, one of the things that separated Andreessen
exactly.
for a lot of years
Yep.
was that motion.
A lot of people have tried to copy it, and just like it true elsewhere, you can't copy it without the people. And so Mark is the one who made that happen.
Pretty tough to copy that guy.
He's a one of one.
That was fun.